We're going to move on to exercise number 1, and you have to be a little patient because now I need to actually talk a little bit about technique and also how the paper works. So before I start, what I actually did to make this easier, as I explained, instead of saying like, okay, the green color, that one, what I did, if you want to do this, great. Otherwise, just understand this is what I'm going to refer to. I started with 1. And then I numbered these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All that means is that way if I say, okay, I'm using number 9, there's 2 greens. Instead of saying like the darker green, it's going to be less confusing if I say, all right, use number 5. Okay? So if you want to do that, otherwise just understand I start at 1 and loop around. Okay? If you're curious about what the colors in your palette look like, you may not have investigated them. Those 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we got a nice bright yellow, kind of a flesh tone orange, like a red, pinkish, and a brown. Okay, on the other side, we got black. Notice I didn't even include 1. You're going to ignore 1 and 7, white and black. Ignore. You're not going to use them. All right, 8 is a nice bright blue. We got 2 greens that are actually kind of similar. One is a bit more woodsy than the other. We have a kind of more natural kind of yellow, like earthy kind of yellow, and then a bluish purple. Okay. All right. You will be mixing a lot of these colors in the future, so you're going to kind of just get to know them. All right. Real quickly, you can control watercolor paper by getting it wet or having it dry. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for you guys here, okay? So basically what this means is that if the paper is wet, when you add paint, the paint will spread throughout that wet region, okay? So as soon as I put this down, see how it's like kind of, sorry, losing power. All right, I got the paper wet, and then when I put the paint into it, see how it spreads. It kind of looks like tie-dye, okay? Depending on how wet the paper is, it's going to keep spreading. If I were to do this and like tilt it a little bit to kind of show and exaggerate it a little bit, it's going to travel, but for the most part, it stops where the paper is wet, okay? Paper is wet right there. And see how it kind of stopped. If you have a ton, it's going to drip, obviously. But you can kind of see, whoop, sorry, I went off the camera. You can kind of see how you can kind of spread it. So the advantage of that is that if I want to make an area that's all evenly pink, I'm going to kind of re-emphasize this, and I'm kind of getting it wet with pink so that you guys can kind of see where it's wet. In theory, as you're learning, you know, sometimes people are like, this totally didn't work, you know. But in theory, as you drop paint, it's going to spread and you're not going to get hard edges. So all that means is that as I'm kind of diluting and painting this pink color, if I were to go over it all evenly, you know, not just dropping in that really, really dark part. Okay, I kind of exaggerated how much water is on this paper for you, so you can see. But the theory is that the color is going to spread and give you an even box. Okay, it might take a little bit of practice. The amount of water, how wet the paper is, and all that are things for you to kind of start practicing with, which is part of the first exercise. Okay, let's say you want to have a little bit more control, though. If the paper is wet, okay, paper is wet, the colors are going to spread. The other thing is that if the paper is wet, you can see this like pooling up like this. I'm on a slightly tilted surface. So you notice how this is doing this? Watercolor really wants to be dry. Sorry, not dry, flat. You do want to try and let your paints dry on a flat surface. See how that's already starting to spread out a little bit? Okay. So because I'm on a work desk that's slightly tilted, it's already doing that. Okay, so you can kind of see if it's tilted, it's going to dry unevenly. So one rule, when you're painting, try and paint on a flat surface for watercolor. And then when you let things dry, always put your painting flat so that it dries evenly. Okay, so you can kind of see a good example of what not to do right there on that. Okay, so now if I want to actually have control and not have things spread, then dry paper, even with a big brush, I can control those lines. Okay, all of this, as soon as the wet paint crosses over something else that's wet, they're going to start merging. So just remember that anytime that the paper is wet, anytime that the paint is wet, colors are going to mix together. So if I come back in here with some another color here, even if I'm trying to be precise like this, okay, because that pink was wet, I can't keep them from mixing. Okay, kind of see it real good right there. The purple and the pink are merging. If I were to put blue, or purple, sorry, if I were to put purple in here, guess what happens? The purple and pink are mixing. Okay, so just always remember, if you want things to mix, if you want things to have nice soft edges, this technique works great some of the times. I paint wet on wet all the time. It's just called wet paper, wet paint. I use this technique a lot, okay? But usually that's like kind of in the background, my beginning layer. And then I do more of like a dry brush is what's called, okay? Dry brush is where the paper's dry, and for the most part, the brush is not dry because you have to have some water, okay? But I'm just kind of controlling it on the dry paper, okay? Anything wet, even if it's a small area, still gonna mix. Your first graded project, I am going to post a paper that says what's gonna happen where. Basically, on your first piece of paper here, remember, leave it attached. Don't take it off until I explain how to take it off, okay? All right, you're gonna have 3 boxes, okay? First box, I'm gonna show you. We're gonna do 2 wet on wet with 2 colors, kind of what I just did. The first one is a layer of color. So you can see I already did that, but you're gonna do one, and then you have to let this dry before you do the next one. One tip is you can feel it. If it feels slightly cool to the touch, it's still wet, okay? All right, this one you're gonna overlap 2 colors. So you're gonna do a box, paint it one color, let it dry completely, and then you're gonna go over it with another box, okay? Or another color in the other box. All right, down here, you're just gonna do some color mixes. So what I did is just use those colors, the numbers. So I'm gonna pre-mix, I'm gonna take some of number 2 and number 9. I'm gonna pre-mix it in here or in here, okay? Taking some out, putting it, taking some out, putting it. Pre-mix 2 and 9, the color that I get once I mix it, I'm gonna lay it right here, okay? So I'm gonna zoom back up. I'm gonna put that here, okay? So you're gonna mix 6 different mixes. So part of the project is to get familiar with some of the different techniques and to get familiar with what colors you have and what colors you can create and just kind of start that process, okay? So just remember that when you have wet paper, okay, even right now, part of it looks wet in the middle. That side's like, is that dry? It actually feels kind of cool still, okay? If I were to come in and try to do a little bit of detail on top of it, let's say, right? Say I came in here with like green or something. Since I have this green left over here. If I start putting this and trying to do lines, even though it looks dry, it's gonna start spreading, okay? So general rule of thumb, if you are doing a project, watercolor takes a little patience. I did these about 10 minutes ago. They seem dry, right? But if I started painting on them, they would probably spread, okay? So what you guys are gonna do is you're gonna take your first piece of paper. When you guys are using your watercolor paper, just understand you have enough for you know, the watercolor projects. You have enough pieces of watercolor paper. You do not have enough to start over if you don't like how it turns out. And even in class, I really try to stress not starting over all the time. We learn from our mistakes, and sometimes it just goes in a different direction, and that's just how it is. But right here, you're just going to paint two colors, what we call wet on wet. So for that one, it's really what I just did here. I did the pink, except for the green. I did the pink one, okay, and then I dropped the purple in, and the two colors just kind of mixed together, okay. Second one, you're gonna paint your rectangle any color, let it dry 100%, so you may have to come back to it later, and then you're gonna do a little bit of dry brush on top, which is basically this kind of thing. Just make some marks and work on trying to get like a little brush control. You can put your name in there if you want. That's totally fine. Something just a little more of a detail kind of a thing. And then this one, you're going to paint one box, the whole thing, okay? And then you're going to come back and say I pick a different color. Say I pick like blue or something. I'm going to paint this whole blue. The whole point is seeing how you can create different colors by overlapping them. Instead of pre-mixing them, just a different technique. And then you're gonna make color mixes and just paint them in. So you guys are working on brush control, you're working on techniques, you're working on getting used to the colors in your paints and getting real familiar with the whole process, okay? So we'll go over this more in live session. We'll be able to take questions and answers, but I wanted to be able to do this on video so you guys could come back to it if you have questions. I'm also going to post a PDF for the assignment with these directions on how to set this up. So first exercise, you're going to do these different techniques. You're going to do these color mixes. Let it dry. Don't take it off because we're going to talk about that next time.